let's start this whole thing.
Yeah, I thought this was a good topic. And full disclosure, like because I did read Erickson's essay, which was, I think, probably spawned by Mike's video. And I watched both of those, but I did not watch yet. I'll put an asterisk on there, AP's thing, where he talked about the use of death and he used some examples from Malazan and stuff like that. But
I didn't watch that either.
Okay, good. So we're totally both ignorant of that, and we can just say whatever we want. If we've contradicted or somehow synced up with AP, then God bless. But let me first introduce Raph, or if this is on Raph's channel, then he can introduce me. But I love getting together with Raph Blue Taxed. He's like right at 600 subs. Let's push him over the top because it's really good stuff. And I thought, what better topic, because he's like a Discworld lover and everything, and has like just such good philosophical perspectives on any topic, and what better thing to philosophize about than dying and death and literature and all that good stuff. So Raph, what up?
I'm just having a blast. I got older, so got closer to death yesterday.
Was your birthday yesterday? Happy birthday.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm getting closer to death at this point.
As we all are, bro, day by day. That's it.
Yeah. So I figured, let's talk about death. And for me, it's the afternoon, so I'm having a beer. I already did a lot of work today, actually. I have 20-something packages to drop off at the post office later today.
Oh, yeah. So you can do it totally guilt-free. So yeah.
Yeah, I can exactly. So I guess cheers.
Cheers. I have a coffee. Cheers. And my wife got me a cup that says being a trophy husband is hard. So, and that we all know is the primary draw of the channel. So it's the eye candy. But
exactly.
Yeah. So what about death and Malazan? Because a lot of people, and obviously this is like spoiler filled, there's no way to talk about death without spoiling everything. So if you haven't watched, just go sub to Raph's channel and have a great day and go watch some of those videos. But, there's a lot of people that die. There's, for me, there's a lot of emotional stuff, but then there's like, a whole afterlife kind of thing, or like there's other realms that people go to. There's ghosts and there's all kinds of weird supernatural crap happening, right? So it's like it opens up the possibility for a lot of different stuff to happen with death.
I feel so. I guess that's sort of like the important thing there to begin with, is that the Malazan world is set up as a world where the world's metaphysics are like their souls. They exist. They seem to be kind of immortal because something has to happen with them, like once the body dies. You have all these other years of soul shifting and all that stuff. You have a realm of the dead and all that. So the fact that death is not like what we nowadays oftentimes, we have that point in a more like materialistic worldview that a lot of us have nowadays. We have come to the point where if you're not a religious person, you probably don't believe in, or not a spiritual person. If you're like a materialistic person, you don't believe in the existence of a soul. You're like, when the body dies, that's it. Consciousness just, ends and then we're done.
Yeah.
When you look at like history, that's a fairly new assumption, apart from like very few philosophers and like the pre-Socratics and stuff like that. Like for the largest part of human history, most human cultures, at least the ones that I kind of sort of, know something about. Like, the existence of a soul and something happening, or the possibility of something happening to that soul after the body is gone, has been in there.
Right.
So Malazan just follows that general
that's
assumption.
Yeah, totally. No, that's interesting because it's like it does kind of not jibe with what we know, but even that, is like what we know today is like they're unknown knowns or whatever.
Yeah, it's like we still don't know by definition.
Yeah, exactly. So no, and like that's the kind of trippy part, because even like in Hood's realm, like the truly like dead people who are just like dead, like there's times when Quick Ben goes and other people go and like talk and beak and all that stuff, and there's like those bones are still just like kind of there, like as humans, you know, or whatever those species were, and they're just kind of like chilling there dead. Same thing in like Dragnipur, right? Like they're all dead in there, and some of them like are actually dead or couldn't pull, and they're just like laying in a pile, but they're still like sentient like piles of whatever.
Yeah, that's true. But so there's like wonderful thing that just like came up, like it's a Discworld quote from like the first book, which we just read on like the buddy read thing. It's glorious. So there's like this mage who died. He was actually poisoned by his daughter, which works because that's like the way those wizard kings in that mountain get, you know, like how succession works for that kind of people. Again, apparently, nice. It's full of cliches. And the point is like because he stays around as a ghost for a while. Because his three children can't really decide who's going to rule afterwards. He's like, I'm gonna stay here as a ghost until you actually figure this out.
Yeah.
And then they figure it out, and he goes, and he's like, then finally Death shows up and takes him with him, and like his like lore master of the mountain is like, what is Death like? And the ghost is like, when I have investigated, I will come back and tell you. And he's like, thanks, preferably during daytime.
Hilarious.
That's like exactly the point. It's like we don't know what death is like,
right?
We haven't like no one has ever come back.
Can't go and then come and report back. Exactly. Yeah, and exactly. And so that's like kind of the whole thing with the Malazan stuff. And you have like a lot of people just die too, right? Like the vast majority of the people in the books just like straight up die, and that's pretty much it. But you know, I kind of like it because I'm not a religious person and I never like went to church and stuff. But like, you know, for me, it's still meaningful because like even when you die, it's still like the lives are still totally altered like massively. And it's not like they're, you know what I mean? Like, it's not like Whiskey Jack dies and then he's like still just like chilling with Corlap watching TV on the couch all the time and stuff. It's like, no, he's freaking pretty much just sitting in that like shitty thing. Or it's like they're like,
well, I guess that one time he's kind of watching Malazan MTV when they just watch Fiddler play.
Yes, that was badass. And they showed up and were like kind of shadowing Hedge. That's what's weird. Like I think time must pass different and stuff like that. But it's like the sacrifices and stuff are still meaningful. You know what I mean? It still sucks when Tog dies again and everything because he, you know, they do move on, but it's like to a kind of,
it changes people.
Yes. It's when, you know, and that's kind of the point of it, I guess, right?
Yeah, I mean that's like, I mean basically that's like the two, or like there's like I guess like three options for like when you look at metaphysics, like three options of what happens after death. Option one is obviously the materialistic one we spoke about, when we say death is the end, that's it. And then you have the transformational one, which is like something happens to your soul, you maybe get reborn, whatever. I mean, that's like the other thing, like so many people believe in reincarnation and then they get pissed off that death isn't like, you know, final in Malazan. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. And then you have the third one, which is the like reward / punishment, like judgment option, which you know is the Christian one where you're like,
yeah,
so yeah, the soul gets them punished or rewarded, which we need. And this is sort of, I guess, the point where we can like come to another idea of death, which really like wides with like Hood near the end of the book, especially.
Yeah.
And that's the idea. That second option,
right?
Not the second option. That third option of justice after death connects to the fact that death is very often random and very rarely fair. You know, there's people that die in old age, peaceful and everything. Like, yeah, that is just part of life, but there's so much death that happens that is like extremely unfair.
Right.
So the notion of like that, like life of like punishment of the soul, of an eternally living soul, an immortal soul after death, is needed in like every kind of religion, and I guess also just for like people to feel better about the world, to solve that idea of like theodicy. When you say like life ain't fair, and it's like, yeah, but really it is fair, because those people who are utter bastards in life They get their punishment later on, and those people that suffer through their entire lives, they'll get their reward later. Yeah,
a coping mechanism, basically. That's depressing.
I mean, so there's I guess we as people, when we look at the world, we realize that life ain't fair. The world ain't fair. But we strive towards fairness as people. We want, things to make sense and be fair. So we come up with these kind of ideas. When you put the theodicy question there is if God is actually good and all powerful,
right?
How can you let all of that work? And the answer obviously is to say, yeah, well, the soul is immortal, so he's gonna make it all right after you die.
Yeah,
which is why even someone who is pretty far away from being a religious person like Immanuel Kant says, what, the immortality of the soul is something we need to posit and say, yeah, that's, souls have to be important, have to be immortal. We can't prove it, but it has to be that way. It has to be one of our axioms, because otherwise the whole thing doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, no, that's crazy. That, for me, that's why I always railed against religion and stuff, and some kind of omniscient, God, because as a little kid, and your parents die and stuff, you're very much dude, that's effed up. How could there be, either there is no God, right? Or there's a God and he's a dick, even if stuff happens for a reason, right? And it's well, this had to happen so some other stuff could happen. So other, you know what I mean? It's that's especially for an unformed brain and stuff like that, is fuck that, dude, that sucks. And but and I guess that's why I was always kind of against that, but I never kind of baked in the eternal soul part. And it was yeah, but they're just going to get their thing. And also is there's weird cultural religious things baked in too, where it's because all these different religions have views about other religions. And if you're not part of their religion, then you of
course,
and all of that stuff too. And so I was that whole eternal soul part is kind of the piece that's kind of the coping mechanism part, I guess, is the part I didn't even, contemplate. Whereas the, it was just the kind of cost part where I was yeah.
See, that's that was for a long time in religion, that was a real problem, for example, in Christianity, because the idea is that you can only get into heaven if you're baptized. And then you have that big question, what about all the people that never got the chance to be baptized? Not those people that just said, I don't want to be a Christian, but those people that, I don't know, lived in a country where Christian missionaries had never come to. What about children? That was a huge one. What about children that died before they could get baptized?
Totally. Or my dad, I was always he was a Jewish guy and whatever, and I'm nothing, but he was, and I was always yeah, but he seemed like a good dude, you know what I mean? The type of dude who would should go to a type of place like that, you know what I mean? So I was always super conflicted. But what's crazy too is in the books you see people who actually I think Hedge is fascinating, right? Because he comes back and can't actually come back, right? Because he even does fully come back, and the humans has a life, can go,
but Hedge is super fascinating because he
I lost your video.
Takes the long way around, right? He doesn't just become a ghost, but he goes with Paran over that, he goes through that proto underworld that
I lost your video.
So he goes all the way down to the actual end of existence, and then comes back the other way, sort of.
Totally. Your video cut out.
Super fascinating. But where I wanted to go actually was the point that we have this
hold
idea
on, Raph. Your video cut out.
My video cut out. That's interesting. I have no idea what's going on there.
How can we get back on the right track?
So here's the thing. Where I wanted to go with this is we have that idea of the eternal soul, of the immortal soul, to have that to solve that problem of injustice or the general unfairness of existence.
Mm-hmm.
And what we then have is what we see with Hood, and what we also see with Terry Pratchett's Death in Discworld in a different way.
Yeah.
The question is, if we have gods that have specific domains, and we see death as a natural function, right? Death just happens because of the universe.
Right.
But we have someone who is the Lord of Death. For whatever reasons, he is that Lord of Death. It's not a question, but the point is, if he is an actual being with human attributes like a conscience and stuff like
Right.
that.
Yeah.
What does it actually do to him to be the person in charge of a natural a natural function that is by nature unfair?
Yeah.
I mean, and you see that with Hood so well, because he's so pissed off at, like from like even earlier, you have a few situations where that happens, when you have like the scene with Beak or the scene when Bidithal dies, and you have this idea that like, even Hood knows justice. And it's like normally he can't do that on the like he can't do that for everyone, but in extreme options he sometimes can sort of force his will onto the universe.
Yeah.
And then when he actually
but it's dies, like a force of nature. Yeah.
When he dies and comes back, and you have that conversation he had with Draconis in Dragnipur, and it's like, when there's like, what will happen now? And there's like, let the gods worry about that. I'm so done with the idea with like being the Lord of Death. It sucks because
yeah.
And then he goes, and when he attacks like the Four-Crawler Sail, he goes and just pounds reverence into like the grounds. Like, I'm so sick of your justice, because
because dude, he had a front row seat to the Four-Crawler Sail kind of justice, right? And that's what makes him
forever
a fascinating character, because he's like, he's the one who's like, he's almost like the steward of this like natural force, right? Or some kind of like elemental force versus like, you know what I mean? And that's kind of like the whole misconception even in world, right? Because all the characters like picture him as this dude who's like, consciously pulling the trigger on deciding that people should die and whatever like that. But it's really just that he's like kind of, I don't know, like, he's the one who's like, well, after that happens, then they go to his realm and he kind of controls that little like, quasi three-dimensional pocket dimension or whatever. But it's like, he's not sitting there going, yes, feed me. And he's like, you know what I mean? Or anything like that. And that's what makes him so, he's compassionate. He's like, fuck, dude, that sucks that, so-and-so died. He tries to like save Brucalion and all that in Memories of Ice. He like does, all the stuff with the Mybi, right? Like, because he was there for all that stuff too. And like you said, Beak and when he eats face, that's all like based out of actually not liking death and being pissed off about the unfairness of it.
It's like someone has to do that job, and that's sort of like where you have the connection with death in Discworld, because death in Discworld, at least like in later books, you see he's sort of like his job is sort of like a civil servant. It's like someone has to do that job, and he's just the person in charge of it. And he tries to make it as humane as possible in a way, but it sometimes still fucks him up, because it's like, this sucks. This is not how it should be, but I can't change it because that's how the universe works.
And they're like heartbroken by it, you know what I mean? And a lot of times it's like, and that's actually like why it's cool when the bridge burners become death too, you know what I mean? Because that's like the same exact thing. They're not going, they weren't these like heinous mass murders, just like bloodthirsty savage killers. It was like, even when they were on those battlefields, they had like the respect of the people they were killing, and there was like a mutual kind of like admiration and stuff there. And like, even when but have you read Orb Scepter Throne?
I have read it like years ago, and I try to kind of remember stuff in there, but I sometimes forget stuff.
Okay, cool. Well, I just wanted to make sure I wasn't going to spoil you, but one of the storylines,
everything by now except the Bauschelane and Cobalt Brooch novellas and Fall of Light.
Okay, good. Yeah, because like when Ansi goes to Moonspawn, he's like treasure hunting and all that, but then he's also there to like see his homies, because he's kind of like depressed and whatever because they died, and like they like materialized to him at one point, and they're like, dude, get the hell out of here, you're like not dead, we are, like, go live your life and stuff. So there again, they're not like in a hurry to just like add to their ranks and all that, you know what I mean? They're like actually like super compassionate and like, bro, freaking stop being depressed, like go get a chick, like go gamble, go drink some beers, like what are you doing?
I think that's like super interesting. There's like some part of that is also in, I think it's in Dust of Dreams actually, when they kind of figure it out. And like, so there's like two things that I think are interesting. The one thing is the idea that death, and it's like, it's almost like a cheap saying, like death has many faces, right?
Yeah.
But we usually picture it like death in like our world and kind of with Hood as well, right? I mean, for Christ's sake, he's even called Hood. So
Yeah.
we usually have that image of, once again, also like the Discworld death. We have that image of the skeleton with
Scary
a black
dude,
robe and a
imposing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Which is completely faceless because it's a skull, obviously.
Yeah. Right.
And the obvious other version of that would be to have like many people that personify death, because death can be all kinds of things to all kinds of different people, and everyone expects something else. Like if we assume that we all have some kind of expectation what will happen to us when we die,
Yeah.
everyone will have their own like personal idea of how that will be. So having death be actually many people makes it possible for like everyone to meet exactly the kind of death they were expecting, instead of just like a snarky jacket.
Yeah, totally. Like you can have the compassionate one, you can have the smart ass ones, right? Like you can have, there was really like bloodthirsty people in there, right? Like you could have trots if you were just like a madman, like if you were like that other guy, what do they call him, Butcher from Orb Scepter Throne, and he would just like get into a freaking fight and he would just go absolutely batshit. He was like a total minor character, but it's like there's a what, you know, there would be a flavor for every type of death expectation.
Yeah. So yeah, that's like the one thing that I find really interesting. The other thing is that sort of since those people like the bridge burners being now guardians of the gates, like the realm of the dead, they are actual people who remember dying, right? They can be way more compassionate in a way than like even Hood could, because it, you know, was Jack Hood. He's not a human. He's not a human, and also he's been doing that job forever. So maybe he's kind of lost touch in some ways.
Totally. And they're like, you know, even Hood, like back when, you know, they were mortals too. So I think that's like an even more interesting part of it, is like these were just like normal dudes. You know what I mean? They were all like, you know, whatever, like Whiskey Jack was like a stonemason beforehand, right? Like before he got into the army, and like all those dudes, they were just like straight up regular trots, all those guys, you know. And so it's like Hood and all these other, you know, like, right, they were like gnarly Omtos Phalak Jagat mages that could like subject entire, you know, hundreds of thousands of people to like tyrannical rule pretty easily and stuff, and enslave like IMAS and stuff. So it's like that's an even bigger thing for me, because then you have like people who know what it's like to be like scared to die and stuff, and you know what I mean? And that's kind of a cool aspect to think about too. And like, you know, it's different for someone who like Hood never expected to like ever die from pancreatic cancer or something like that, or to get like stabbed in the chest or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, there's like this like quotes in Dust of Dreams at some point where they say, "Who would you rather have welcome you at the gates of death, but Bridgeburn?" Like, yeah, well, no one actually, because you know they kind of get it.
yeah. Who said that? I want to find that. That's the quote I've been looking for so long. It's in Dust of Dreams. I've been looking for
I think it's either Dust of Dreams or it's the beginning of the Crippled God, because there's like two conversations that people have on that. One of those conversations is sort of when Khaled meets them. The Bridge Burners. You know, when Whiskey Jack sends her the Jackhood army to protect her three Kachin Jamal from the Naruk.
Yeah.
And then there's a conversation on that topic that Quick Ben has with Ganos Paran or Kalam at the beginning of the Crippled God.
Yeah. Somebody post a chapter for me if they watch this and know what we're talking about.
It should be at the beginning of the Crippled God when
I'm gonna go look for it after this. I was like writing it down on my phone because I'm like, that is exactly the quote. Yeah, because they're like, dude, who better, like, what, dude, imagine that, like somebody who, you know what I mean, like knows what it's like, someone who's like not super scary and imposing and all that, but is gonna be like, you know, bring it in for a hug, homies, you know. So which is kind of cool, dude. Like, again, as somebody with no like religion, that's why this stuff never like pissed me off, or it's still like, you know, the death side of these books resonated with me, is because like it still does totally like change people, and it's fun to like, or not fun, but it's like, you know, it's a way to investigate outside of the framework of basically like, you know, American Christianity, which is the only like kind of lens I have to be able to like put on it, you know, and
Yeah.
just to explore like what happens when you die and stuff, you know what I mean? And like, and how even people who die and come back, like even if it is final or if it's not final and stuff, there's just all these different implications and whatever. But like either way, it's still like, you know,
Yeah.
there's
See,
like
like
a
another thing that I
fundamental
find really interesting is that criticism that, like, not to, you know, drag on Mike for like when he said that.
no, no, totally.
I kind
I
of
know
get
exactly what he's saying. Yeah.
the idea that like death loses meaning when people can come back, and like the interesting thing that I find here is the idea that things have to have meaning, which is sort of this like super like to become like left-wing political once again. It's that like whole idea that everything has to be paid for, and death is only worth something if you actually don't come back. And you know that idea that like meaning is something that comes through like some kind of payment in a way, or some kind of, yeah. And I'm like, look, you suffer through the whole thing when someone dies. And if you really like those people, wouldn't you just like, love for them to actually come back and have a second chance or get like more like life? Wouldn't that be something that you wish for people? It's like, why do you say this ruins my ideas? Like, because they don't stay dead. Although,
Yeah.
on the other hand, you have that like whole conversation, which I found like super interesting. And I guess the point is like Mike doesn't know that yet because he hasn't read that far.
Right.
But you have that whole situation with Fiddler and Hedge, and Fiddler not, trying to come to terms with the fact that Hedge, whom he is grieved for, is actually back now. It's like I grieved for you once. I tried to get over you. It happened, and now you're back, and I don't think I can do it again. So
yeah, totally.
That discussion, that whole discussion. That's like, I guess that's like sort of the fascinating thing with Malazan, right? It's like that everything. There's so much in that book that, like, for most things, like most criticisms or like most issues you have with the books, there's going to be some quote at some other place that will totally actually discuss the thing that you have a problem with. Mm-hmm. And there is like exactly that thing where Hedge is like suddenly back, and Fiddler is like, dude, I can't deal with the fact that you're back.
Totally.
It was difficult enough the first time round.
Yeah, and you have it all, right? And that's kind of like a Fiddler defense mechanism aspect too, instead of kind of, like a death thing, because he, that's like the whole point. It's like what happens when people do come back is it's like, bro, yeah, like that guy's changed, like, and they're changed too. So it's like you have all the different flavors because there is so many deaths and stuff, because it's like, that would suck. I but you kind of get mad at Fiddler too, and you're like, and I still have that kind of paid for aspect baked in my mind too, but it's like, I remember watching those ones and being like, dude, Fiddler, like, come on, bro, like your homie's here, like, go, you guys should be freaking high-fiving, like rolling in the dirt, pounding beers, and you know, you're super standoffish. And it's more about like his own emotional trauma than having been like, he doesn't want to put himself out there again, basically, because he's like, I'm now dead inside and whatever, and like, or trying to deaden himself from like those feelings. But then like you still have like guys like Buke, where it's like death is 100% final, and the dude has to go live a fucking depressing life because his family is totally dead. You know what I mean? And so you get both.
He just turns into a falcon and flies up. No, a sparrowhawk.
A sparrowhawk, Raph. That's a critical distinction. I only got half a point for saying it was a bird. So
yeah, it wasn't a bird or a plane. It was a Buke.
Oh, biggest bad in the Malazan quiz.
Yeah, but so I want to go somewhere and I'm just like drop the ball on that one. But yeah,
I totally cut you off when you were talking about the Hedge thing, but I do think that's an important one, because it's like he totally dies, right? And he's like, gone and whatever, but then like being able to come back and just like, and I still like, it kind of has just like those same vibes, which I think cut through the whole thing, but it's like the going to war and coming back. And I think you've talked about that and stuff, about just like how you can never like go back to the way that you were before and stuff. And like, that was a cool aspect to that specific death storyline too, because it's like they can't go back.
Hedge is actually crying, right? Hedge comes back and is like, I'm the same dude. Why don't you all treat me like the same dude?
Totally.
I'm going to revive the bridge burners.
Bridge burners are back, baby. Let's get it.
And I feel that's sort of like the interesting thing there is like compared to other people that die and come back, like, I don't know, Bodin in like being suddenly the Knight of Death, which, you know.
Yeah, he's totally jacked.
Yeah, or you have like
Roulade, right? Every time he dies and comes back, he's freaking
he's a different person.
Yeah.
Like Hedge is the only one who's like, no, I'm still the same dude, and I guess like having a different Hedge back would have been much easier for Fiddler, right?
Probably, right? Because then he would have been like, oh, bro, I know you must have been through hell, you know, and then they could kind of like have a little bit of a codependent kind of element to their relationship versus like, yeah, he's like, yeah, I'm glad that you're back to square one. He's like, I'm so freaking traumatized, bro. He's like, I've got PTSD. He's like, I'm glad you're ready to drink some beers. He's like, I'm fucking need some counseling.
It's exactly how it is, basically. So yeah, I guess like the other thing about death in Malazan is Van Erickson is really like hammering in that point that death sometimes is just super random, which I guess can also make like I guess the idea that we have, the problem that we have sometimes is the idea that like in a narrative play we expect things to make narrative sense. It's what Terry Pratchett would call a narrative causality. It's like things happen in stories because that's how stories work. He has that all the time. He does that like really interesting thing. It's like if something is exactly 1,000,000 to 1 chance, it will certainly work because that's what we learn in stories. Like someone says it's 1,000,000 to 1 chance, but it might just work.
Yeah, that's why you say it. Certainly,
you got to say it. It has to be exactly 1,000,000 to 1, and then it definitely will work because it's a certainty.
Exactly.
and so you have that idea of the narrative causality is something that we as people who think
it's an
in
expectation
all the time.
Yeah,
we have these expectations of books, and I guess that's sort of like where the whole idea of like death loses meaning if it's not permanent. It's like we expect death to make sense in the story, to make some kind of point, and then it's a point, right? That's sort of the end of that.
And that's always the criticism, like, what was the point of that, right? Like that one had no point, and it's like, no, it was just a dude who got stabbed in the neck, man. Yeah, it was gnarly, you know what I mean? And actually I do fall into that same trap, because like even in the ice stuff, right, like that's one of the main kind of reasons why I don't think that the like mystery, you know, Andy that comes back with the white hair and stuff is Animander Rake, because I'm like, oh, that would like totally cheapen like the, you know, because it's like that was the point of Rake's thing, was like he was gonna sacrifice himself to like, you know, protect the gate or whatever, open it back up and stuff, and you know, and so then if he can just come back, then it's like, well, you know, now he's just going to come back and be the champion of his people again. And it's like, no, that's why it has to be like Spinnock or somebody like that, you know, that comes back at the end of a sale. And we don't really know. They don't tell us conclusively, but
it's pretty clear that it is Rake, right? But the point is,
you think so? I thought it was Spinnock.
But we never learned that Spinnock dies.
True.
We talked about that with when I did the talk about like the end of Crippled God.
I know, but
it's like we never hear, and like Spinnock walks in there and that's it. We don't even get his like death scene. And I figured that if Spinnock would die, would at least get like something about him dying.
Yeah.
So
I don't know. But they say he played the Kef Tanar like game, but then it's like, I guess he was moving those pieces on behalf of Rake because he was always going back and like reporting what the Seer Brahmin's move was.
There's one scene in Toll the Hounds where Spinnock talks to Rake, and it is made pretty clear that that it's basically Rake playing Seerdamin and just
because he's like reporting on the moves.
Yeah, exactly. So I have to reread Assail. I guess that's what I'm going to do.
No, just read The God Is Not Willing, and then we're going to pick this back up again, because there's like
it's what I'm going to do after I finish The God Is Not Willing.
You might not have to. You might not have to. That's what I'm saying, because they talk about it in there. There's like a whole cult of the Darkwing Lord or something like that. Or
yeah, but like the point is, like I thought at the time there were one or two points near the end of a sale where it is almost cut and dry that it is Rake.
wow. See, so now I'm mind blown, because that does put a whole new spin. So then, okay, so then does it cheapen then the Toll the Hound's sacrifice then, if he just gets to come right back, or is that like kind of what you're saying?
Like so one thing is, logically there's no reason for Rake to be dead after Toll the Hounds, because everyone else and their dogs who are in that sword when it gets broken and are killed by the sword get to come back. Hood comes back, Draconis is back. Why would Rake be any different?
But I thought it was kind of like sealing the thing, like the rent and mourn or something. Like he had to like basically, you know, put his soul in there permanent to kind of like buttress the gate somehow or something like that. You know what I mean?
I don't think that's what happened there, but I really
I don't know either.
Like I figured like the main thing that I really loved about like Rake's sacrifice in a way, Rake's sacrifice in Toll the Hounds, the thing that I really loved about the entire thing is that Rake's sacrifice is basically mirrored on like the smaller scale by Harlow, because those two go through hell to force their mothers to acknowledge them.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
I guess the point is like he can do whatever he does there to force Mother Dark to acknowledge him and his people.
Yeah.
Like
I don't know. I read it as a sacrifice though, that he was like giving up his life or something, like for.
Well, technically he is giving up his life because he can't count on, you know, everyone coming out, because I guess like no one knows what will happen if the sword breaks.
Yeah.
Or like they kind of know or whatever, but you know, so as I said, I need to go back to SL to figure that out. But I thought like in my memory, which is a very spotty thing indeed.
No, I believe you.
There was one or two points where it was really, really made clear.
I'm on Blood and Bone right now, so I'm going to be there soon, and I'm going to read it again, and I look forward to paying more attention. Because even as I like kind of, you know, sat here and listened to you, and I'm like thinking through this in my head, and like in a way, it's like it doesn't cheapen really the sacrifice at all. Like even if
it's completely changed when he comes back. Although that may just be because we don't get that much Animander Rake written by Esselman before.
Yeah, totally. But like even if he came back,
yeah, you go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, even if he came back exactly normal, like even if Whiskey Jack would have come back like immediately, like 5 seconds later, and like someone could have like rewound the clock, like he still stepped up to like protect Silver Fox and stuff or whatever, and that is still like the kind of what made it so badass in the first place. So whether he like, you know, died, or even if he would have survived, like you still would have been a badass just for the fact that he kind of stepped up to the plate to like protect this little kid, quote unquote.
Yeah.
So I think
there's two things in there with the whole idea of like death being meaningful. The one thing is that if everyone knows that death is not the end and people come back, if everyone knows that, it basically means that taking risks doesn't have the same meaning, which goes to that whole, like, you know, like what I said before, that like super capitalist kind of thought that is so ingrained in all of us. It's like deeds have to have meaning. They have to be bought by something. It's like if something good comes to you and you didn't work hard for it, that's not deserved. So the idea on the
transactional nature, right? Raph, you're missing the opportunity to plug our transactional nature video.
Exactly. Go watch that transactional nature video. It's good. I've seen it. I've actually been in it.
Exactly.
But the point is, exactly, that's like the one side of it. The other side of it is us thinking in narratives, where we say like things have to make sense within a narrative.
Yeah.
Those are like, I guess, sort of like different aspects to it.
Yeah, I still like it though. I think that, you know, death's treated different, and that's what makes it really fun, you know, because like I said, there's like, you do get to see people where there's like finality to it. Like Tool is it's such an interesting you know, his journey through death and then life and then death again or undeath or whatever is like pretty.
He gets around.
Yeah,
he gets
totally.
around the realms of mortality.
And like when he comes back, he appreciates the hell out of it. He has kids, he gets married, you know what I mean? He's like freaking just so pumped to like just go hunt and sit in a bush and like kill some animals and eat some meat and chill.
But see, that's like the other side of the death thing that I think is interesting to look at is the whole side of like how people that inflict death think about it, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So you have those people that really, are traumatized by killing and like witnessing death and so forth. You have that in the Malazan world, obviously.
Yeah, totally.
And then you have people like, I don't know, Corporal Broach.
Right. Who just absolutely straight up relish the idea of putting people, even like the Segula and stuff. I thought that was like a really interesting part, like the whole thing where they try and make the Segula the executioners, you know what I mean? And they're like, dude, we don't just like kill people. They're like, we like to like kill people who are trying to kill us or whatever. But
yeah.
You know, and so there's like that whole thing. And I love too, like the whole burying the enemies thing, you know what I mean, is like even even when you yourself killed those people, you're like, fuck dude, I feel bad, and like how you try and like not have to do it, I guess.
The other thing that is interesting there is that the only group we see who is just like, apart from like absolute like psychopathic monsters like Corporal Broach, the one group who has no problem with killing innocents, or has very little problem with killing innocents, are the Talani Mass, because they have been so far removed from life.
Yeah, totally.
For so long. So they
kill kids and stuff.
Although even even some of them suffer at the end of Dust, like in the Crippled Godders, it still Dust of Dreams when they go and kill all the Bargas, the surviving Bargas, and then even they suffer from taking life. But apart from that, they before that they have no problem going into Iron and Aaron and killing everyone and stuff like that. It's like
totally,
because as like what has happened with them at the time is they have left all these things connected to life behind, because they are not that's the point. It's like they're not dead, they're undead, they're outside of the life death like dichotomy. They're like
spectrum,
they've stepped out of it, and there's something else now. So the emotions for us are connected with death and life in both sides, and it's kind of interesting to see that when someone like Tula Shorn comes back.
Yeah, totally. And like freaking Tula Shorn is a dope ass character. I can't wait for you to read Fall of Light too, because that's like a really good storyline there. But
I hope so. I've only read Forge of Darkness, and I'm figuring he's Kagamandra Tulas for some reason, because he gets all these like Jellican pups to take care of, and I'm pretty sure that's where Hounds of Shadow come from. But
exactly.
That's sort of me just like guessing at stuff.
No, me too. I don't know. It's not like fully confirmed either yet, but hopefully in Walk in Shadow it will be. But it's like, their names are too similar to not be. But like they're told, the IMAS are the total like ends justify the means type of attitude towards death, right? It's like we're right, and it's like the total like objectively on the side of justice or whatever, and so then whatever we do is therefore right. It's like when Nixon said, whatever I do is legal because I'm the president.
I've heard that was challenged.
We crunched the numbers. Don't check out, but
so like see what I found really interesting is about this whole idea that we take so many things for granted, like in our own life. Like we talk about stuff like reincarnation and all that stuff, and once it's couched in a more spiritualist language, we can go back and read all these like fantasy books that I love, at least some of them.
Yeah.
And that shit happens all the time, right? Even Gandalf comes back and stuff like that.
Yeah, totally.
And I've not heard anyone complaining about Gandalf returning cheapening his like scene in Casa Doom. The point is,
yeah,
that it is couched in a more like mythical and religious language in the Lord of the Rings, for example.
Totally.
Now there's other stuff there, but where Malazan differs to that is that Malazan uses a very, very like everyday physical language as compared to like a metaphysical language. Like people are just, and I think that's where the jarring part comes from, where like Malazan doesn't use, like rarely uses like these modes of speech, because like religion is like not that often discussed, and even when it's discussed in like an anthropological way, where you like look at it like through a scientist lens and just describe ritual. You never like actually talk about belief and stuff.
Yeah.
So the fact that these things happen is more jarring to us as readers, I guess.
Yeah, because they seem more like us, right? And you're like, well, you can't just like die and then not be.
Like, that's, I guess that's sort of the point. It's like we can say that we believe in reincarnation all the time.
Yeah.
And if like, you know, our dead grandmother just shows up, we'd still be pretty much weirded out.
Totally. And I still think it ties in with like all the themes, right? Because like it still like begs the question of like, you know, kind of dignity and worthiness, like who, you know, kind of had a good life, who didn't. It still leads to like all those questions of like, you know, the kind of broader themes. What does it mean to be a good person and all that stuff? And so I you know, and again, as a like kind of non-religious person, like I come to fantasy books to be able to get and contemplate on stuff like that, you know what I mean? Or to like just see how other people do it and get some like sense. Like Ithcovian's death was still super tragic, even though he technically like lives in that barrow outside of Coral, right? And like you could theoretically go and like interact with them. It's like that sacrifice was still meaningful. It was like he's still a friggin' stand-up dude for just being like, F the cost, I'll just, you know, self-suicide here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's sort of the like the next thing there is that when we talk about death and like the fear of dying that I guess most of us have, a lot of is, I guess, is usually the fear, like is more like fear of pain and all of that, right? It's not the actual, like if you will, I mean, that's one thing, like if you believe that dying just ends your perceptions because you're, you know, that's it.
Yeah.
Then just like, you know, dying painlessly in your sleep or whatever should not, you know, make you afraid. But the fear of death is so much a fear of trauma. So,
or yeah,
for those people to die and then come back means they actually have to live with the trauma. They actually lived through that trauma because, you know, they're back. It's not just you know, they just switch it off and that's it. So, you know, they're back and they have lived through all of that. Like even Hedge, I mean, he blew himself up. I'm pretty sure that was painful.
Yeah, totally. That can't feel good, you know, even if it was like instantaneous, there's like a moment of like, ow, right? Yeah. So no, totally. It's like it, you know, and I think like the kind of some of the fears like that you might not have no perception, right? Like what if it's black? Well, like what if it's like imprisonment, you know what I mean? And you're like, yeah, I just got to post up and I can't like move or do. It's kind of like Vin in the Mistborn thing where she becomes the cloud and then she just can't move or do anything. It's like that would suck, you know. So it's all of it, and then it's like, you know, to come back and have to live with that or not, or even just have to suffer through. That's why people like, you know, people like me, death is usually out of sight, out of mind. And then unless you read books like this, and then you can kind of approach it in a way that doesn't, you know, lead to panic attacks and stuff like that.
And I guess like the other side around is that like, I feel that's sort of like when we come back to the like Fiddler Hedge thing and the idea of like death not being meaningful is like, we feel kind of betrayed in our emotions, which, you know, comes back to the idea that things have to have meaning and, you know, prices and whatnot. It's like we grieve for a character because he dies, and then he comes back, and then we feel betrayed. It's like, why did I go to actually, you know, invest all these emotions went and had a cry when Rake just like runs to his own sword and whatever. Why did I do all of that? If he just shows up again and gets a new sword with like, although he loses an arm for it, so there's that.
Yeah, but what a badass sword and freaking
But that's like I think like the big like point why it is Rake and not Spinach Durav is when he goes there, they say like, you had an unusual sword before, you need a new like unusual sword. Like Spinach Durav, I
never had
know.
an unusual sword. He just had
maybe
he had a Huss sword.
He just had like
could have had a Huss sword, Raph. You don't know. Don't ruin me.
Well, his sword didn't do Huss things.
Yeah, no, he didn't do much with it for sure. Yeah, damn
I'm
it.
pretty sure Spinach Durav feels like the guy who goes through swords like he goes through high priestesses. I don't know.
Well, now after a decade, I've had my whole world upended on this one call. So, but that's okay. That's okay. Yeah, no, it is. It's cool. It's like, it's crazy because it's he still made the sacrifice though, and it doesn't really cheapen Toll the Hounds for me because he's still like, he still went through that act and did all that stuff, and the fact that she decided to stand him back up again, I guess, is like kind of another besides the point.
I mean, that's the point. Like, why would we think that having our own sword rammed into our forehead wouldn't be like really traumatic and painful?
Yeah. Totally.
I mean, come on. It's not like this is going to be like walk in the park.
Yeah. No, and I get it on an intellectual level. I still get it just like on a surface level, though. It's like a risk isn't really a risk if just like you get to press the reset button. And I think that's kind of what underlies that sentiment. I just think that like as you get to the end of the 10 books, it's a lot more like complicated than people just press and reset. They don't just go back to square one. The people around them can't just go back to square one. And there's still like all the kind of implications of how people dealt with it, how it affects the rest of the people that are left behind, and like that whole never going home aspect. So that's why it's still like, I think an interesting kind of thought experiment to have in the books, and it's not just like some throwaway thing.
I think like another thing that we often like kind of like forget is that a lot of the Malazan world is based on the role-playing stuff, right?
Yeah.
And with Dungeons and Dragons, you always had the resurrection spell. It was super fucking expensive, right? It cost like 1,000 gold pieces and whatnot. But the fact that you can get your character back, because obviously it's rooted in playing and like playing your character and losing it at like level 20, not 20, level 10 because of a bad die roll.
Yeah,
they realized pretty quick that that's like bad game design, because that can turn people off playing the game. So that's how you have like the idea of like a resurrection. I mean, you still have to go to a temple, like pay 1,000 gold pieces, and everyone has to pray and whatnot.
Yeah,
and then they come back, and I'm like, yeah, that is just part of why that happens in the Malazan world, because it started out as an advanced Dungeons and Dragons campaign before it turned into like a GURPS campaign. But still, it's like the idea of resurrection is something that is in there all the time. Yeah. It's just part of the whole world. And
yeah, totally. And it's one small part too. Like that's the other thing is like, we made this whole big old giant video just because it's fun to talk about all the different ways that people die, what happens when people die and come back, and the god of death. And just like, I think it's a fun topic, but it's like, it's not the overarching like theme of the whole books either. It's just like one area that he's exploring and throwing out there. And he just kind of, I think like with all these themes, he like looks at them from different angles, and it's like you see certain characters, approach it one way, and then another set, like you said, with the mirror characters and all that stuff. It's just like, it's just a way to kind of explore a topic, which is kind of one that usually, like I said, gives me anxiety.
Yeah. Okay. So, but I see like another thing that I find interesting is the difference between death. Now, I hope you can hear me because my neighbor is, doing dumb shit with his bike.
Oh yeah, I can still hear you, but I thought they were doing construction.
I don't know why he's doing that, but he's just riding in circles around the house.
That's so funny.
People.
Hey, dude, COVID's over. Live the dream.
Well, he's doing it alone, so he could have done that during COVID as well. But no, what I want to look at is the idea that there's like two things. One of them is death. And the other one is dying, which is like really interesting when you look at Toll the Hounds, right? When you have the dying god,
Yeah.
who is never actually dead. He's just continuing in the act of dying.
Which is Hairlock, right?
What?
And that's Hairlock, right?
It is partly Hairlock, yes.
Yeah.
I think it's not, it's sort of Hairlock, and it's also, I guess, part of Belladam. It's a mix of Hairlock and Belladam Skullcrusher.
Yeah.
I think it's sort of like, I mean, that's sort of the point. Is like, it's Belladam who saw what happened to Hairlock and is trying to do the same, and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So that's sort of, but anyway, the point is like that dying is meaningful. Death is just the end of dying. So you focus more on the act of dying, which is where the trauma is, where all that stuff happens.
Mm-hmm.
But death is just the end of the act of dying.
Interesting. Yeah, so it's like the dying is where all the panic, the fear, the pain, the
Exactly.
Yeah. Ugh.
Yeah. And the dying god is doing that forever and ever and ever, which, you know,
not
fun.
And
I guess that's like one of the things that we don't see that much of in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, because of the, you know, the kind of story it tells and the kind of setting it has. We kind of see part of it with maybe with the Maibi, sort of. Although there, you know, there's like a different thing there for the Maibi as well, with the whole like depression part,
emotional part of it, yeah.
But the point is, when we look at our lives, right, like, you know, like the real world and whatnot,
yeah,
you know, these people that know that they are dying, you have like, I don't know, cancer or something like that, or like, you know, dementia or something, like, you know, it's a terminal disease, you know, they are in the act of dying forever, and it is emotionally super stressful for everyone involved. And I mean, obviously, I can't even imagine how it is for people who actually are in that position. It's like that.
Oh, it'd be nuts. Yeah, I always trip on that.
That's sort of the point. Like the act of dying, which comes back to the idea that like death is about more like a fear of pain or whatever. Like the fact that you're in that situation, it just keeps on going. That's where the trauma is, because death is just the punctuation. It's when it actually ends.
Totally. And I think that's like kind of, you know, why people always want to like die in their sleep and stuff like that, and why like stuff is like cancer and stuff is so scary, because not only is it like the actual like, you know, pain of like, you know, whatever kind of cancer you have would suck and stuff, but like for my parents, they had cancer for like 2.5 years before they died, and they like had to like wait, you know, like people like me literally do like have deaths is pretty much just like an out of sight, out of mind thing. We all know we're gonna die and whatever, like try not to dwell on it too much and enjoy like life or whatever. But it's like, if you have terminal cancer, it's like you literally just like every second of every day you have to sit there and be like, yeah, I'm dying, like I don't know if it's gonna be today or what, you know, I'm hurting, I'm dying. Like that would just be like so nuts. And it isn't really that guy Munug in Memories of Ice. That's why he kind of gets hooked up with the crippled god,
who
right?
dies at the end of Toll the Hounds.
Totally. Yeah. And he goes in and like kind of because he's just like so hurting and wants to, and that was like kind of his motivation for going to the dark side or whatever, is like,
which isn't even the dark side at the end, but you know.
Yeah, exactly. And like, and he ends up just trading one kind of cancer. Oh no, and then he becomes crippled, or he loses his, like he's paralyzed, right?
He's paralyzed. That's the point. It's like he loses his, like the cancer gets exchanged for something else.
Right. Yeah.
Which is like his paralysis when he, you know, creeps back. And
totally. So it drives you to do nutty stuff. Like if you have to like sit there and grapple with death. It's weird that we don't actually see a lot of that stuff. There isn't like I guess there's like a whole goddess of pestilence and stuff, and those people kind of have the plague and whatever, but you don't really see them living with the leprosy or whatever it is very much.
No, because, you know, it's not exactly like an interesting topic to you can't tell like a long fantasy story about it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not fun. It's not fun to watch.
Totally.
Most of the time.
They're depressing books. Tuesdays with More, even that one's like trying to be upbeat, right? And it's like how the guy goes and has lunch with this guy with cancer every day for like a couple of years before he dies, and it's like you can only read that's not a book that you go back and reread a million times, you know what I mean? Because it's just like heavy stuff. You're like, okay, I survived that, let's move on.
I guess like the other interesting thing that we see, and I see that's like the super fascinating thing when we talk about the fact that death isn't, meaningful because people come back.
Yeah.
Then we look at people at like the fact that death is like an important part of ascension. It's like no one complains that like Kellenbeth's assassination, what you might call
Quote
assassination,
unquote, yeah,
is meaningless because obviously the emperor dies, but then he comes back as a god, and we're like, yeah, that's fine. And then Treach dies, gets killed by some undead change him out, and then he comes back as the lord of the Lord of Summer, the
right,
god of war.
Yeah.
And we're like, okay, that's fine. I don't care. Like now he's a god. And then like Bodin dies and he comes back as a Knight of Death, and we're like, okay, that's
fine. Yeah, totally. No,
that's not
I hear
fine.
you.
It's like that's what like isn't anyone ever staying down? It's like, no, you can't keep a good man down. Also, they'd come back as something else.
Yeah. Talk comes back as Talk and Aster.
And I mean, but that's like the thing with Talk and Naster. Is he actually dying, or did his soul shift before that?
No, yeah, I think he was kind of like a Maibi, like he, he was a hollow.
I mean, Talk and Naster is like a Maibi. So a Naster is a Mahai, because even before that, it's like always explained that he is like empty and there's no soul in there and so forth.
He's just a husk. He's just a shell.
Yeah, exactly. And then you see even how like he's changed, by losing his one eye for like.
Yeah.
I don't know where it happened, but we even see where his eye, where he loses his eye during the like one point in the battle or whatever. And we see how he becomes more and more like Talk. And then he's at that point where Talk's actual physical body is, and that's like the other thing. You have that point where like Talk needs to be killed so his soul can travel to his new body. Yeah. So it's very much not that.
It's like the soul's tethered to him, and he has to like kind of.
Yeah, exactly. It's still tethered to that old body, and it needs to be shifted to a new one, which is super fascinating. So we just had that. We just had that Dresden talk with John Cal.
Yeah.
On the third Dresden Files novel. I don't think you have not read any.
No, I haven't read any of them. Somebody told me. Mike told me to read them actually.
So that's like an interesting thing. So Dresden does something in there, and it might spoil something for you if you're like.
I'm not that worried about it.
All right, so there's a situation where they have where it's about stuff is about ghosts, and the idea is like ghosts are created. If someone dies, there's no spiritual energy and so forth, then a ghost is created. So what happens is that Dresden lets himself be killed, like throttled or something, or no, he just like don't worry, he lets himself die consciously. Yeah. So there's a ghost. His ghost is created, and then someone resuscitates him and revives him, gives him CPR. So there's like both his spirit, which is obviously now back because he's like has been revived. Yeah. And his ghost, and they're working in common in that spiritual realm. Oh wow! Stuff. And that's something that is possible in like the Dresden verse.
That's nuts. That's interesting.
Which is like interesting because that's like how much does death lose meaning if you like can just like create doubles of you in spirit?
Oh my god, right? Like yeah, that's the ultimate conception. So it's like, yeah, they're two totally like separate entities, but they can be, they can work together, they can be separate or whatever. Yeah. And like they're, that's what's cool about this, the soft magic system in general, I think, is like they can do whatever the hell they want, you know what I mean? And it just happens, and it's cool to see.
But I feel that's like sort of like, I mean, there's like when we look at death in Malazan, there's like obviously death happens. Important people can come back, which is part of like the role-playing game heritage of the whole thing. Yep. Plus, we live in a world where like immortality of souls and the duality of like the soul and the body has been part of our cultural heritage, no matter where we come from, for the last, I don't know, millennia. Yeah. For most people. And looking at it, couched in those like very mundane terms that it is couched in Malazan, is sort of what makes it like weird to look at the fact that people come back. It's like we believe all of that shit all the time, or some of us do anyway.
Yep.
But if you actually put it into like sort of scientific terms, like, okay, that's weird. And that's sort of where I guess like a lot of the disconnect comes from when we look at it. How
Yeah, no, I think it's just, it hits too close to home, right? It's one thing to do it in these kind of highfalutin philosophical terms with all these, like allegory of the cave or whatever, like some kind of crazy, you know what I mean? Like philosophical, like concepts and stuff like that. But it's like, when it's just like a dude who could easily be you, or you could like put, you know what I mean? Someone where it's really easy to empathize and like kind of put yourself in their shoes, then it like becomes like a lot more, it hits a little harder and is like a little bit more kind of abrasive or something, because you're like, just like, it just more freaks you out because it's like, it's not some weird creed.
I mean, you and me come from like a Christian background, right? Our religion is built on that guy coming back. That's sort of the basis of our religious background.
Totally.
Like,
but it's like this
Jesus
weird, like extra
a lot of
being,
meaning
right?
Because he came back.
Yeah, so it's like, that's the, but it's not, it was never us. It wasn't like, he wasn't just like a regular dude. That's the whole point of like, he has to be like the son of God and like all this crazy stuff. So it's like,
but see, that's like the really interesting and weird thing. There's like whole discussion. Like, I'm gonna go on a tangent on like early Christology, which is like super fun.
Yeah.
And had weird consequences. Now the problem is, the question that is debated in Christology is Jesus, like living Jesus Christ at the time, is he made of human stuff or of divine stuff? That's important. That has like, there's like philosophical and theological tracts written on the question.
Oh, wow.
If Jesus went and ate something, what happened to that, and what was his like crap when it came out? And the question, which is super fascinating. It's super fun. But the question there is,
deep. Yeah.
No. So that there's like everything hinges on that. So what we know is that what Jesus does, like he gets crucified, he suffers on the cross, he dies for our sins, he goes down to hell, he comes to the realm of the dead, and then he comes back because they basically cheated the devil and everything. But that's not the point. So the point that we're looking at is that if he's divine, divine stuff means God is perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect means perfection excludes pain, right? So if Jesus, at the point where we nailed him to a tree, was already divine, he would not have felt pain, so he would not have suffered. So the whole trick that like saved all our souls, if we believe in that stuff, would not have worked because he would never have suffered. The trick works because it's like he suffers for our sins. Yeah, and then
there's no sacrifice if you're just like, bro, you can just shoot me a million times.
Sacrifice. Yeah. There's no sacrifice if he was already divine at that point, which is where that discussion comes from. Because
interesting.
So even in our religious past, in like early Christianity, we were debating about the question whether Jesus' death was actually meaningful or not. Wow. Because he came back.
That's interesting. Yeah, so that's like a whole different lens to look at the rake stuff through, right? Because it's like that's it, same. That's kind of the flip side of that same coin. If he he's basically Superman, and you could just stab him. I forget what movie that is. Oh, Zohan, when the guy can just like get stabbed a million times and he's like, I feel nothing.
Yeah. Well, I'm pretty sure Ray got a bit of a headache from that duel with Decimaltor.
Yeah, definitely that didn't feel good. So, oh my God, so much good stuff. Well, dude, we have to like do this again and talk about death once you get through Fall of Light and Walk in Shadow too, because I want to know what you think about Hood's whole arc there and stuff, and I'm excited to see what happens. But I also want to hook up and see what you think after The God Is Not Willing, because there's like some death stuff there too. So I think we could do even like another sequel on this at some point.
And yeah, definitely. I mean, I'll be done with The God Is Not Willing next Monday. I don't know how much. I mean, I'll try to read all of it tomorrow on Friday.
Yeah.
But then I'm going to celebrate my birthday on Saturday with some friends where we go up to the castle and annoy everyone else with obscure heavy metal until like the sun comes up again and drink.
So awesome.
Cool. Drink mead and cheap illegal Greek spirits and wine and beer and be like, it's a symposium. We're going to talk philosophy as well.
Oh my God. Look at, you're going to be in heaven. You're going to be in heaven on earth, Raph.
Yeah. So I'm not sure. Like I got to finish The God Isn't Willing before that happens because my brain's going to be wiped on Sunday. I can tell you that.
Yeah, exactly.
But then on Monday, we can totally talk about The God Isn't Willing.
Cool. Yeah, exactly.
When you come back from your camping trip.
Or yeah, well, I might have internet while I'm camping, so I'll just keep everybody posted and maybe I'll be able to collab from up there. So I am going to still be working. So.
All right. I'll be done with The God Isn't Willing very quickly.
Yeah, judging by the speed with which you tear through like Forge of Darkness, yeah, I have no doubt that you'll probably finish it first or second day. So,
I mean, it's like I also like with like new books, whether it's like Malazan or something else. I just like to just like plunge in and just go through it. And then like go back and read like in a more careful way on a reread. But I feel it's an important aspect of reading is to actually just like go for the experience and maybe binge and just like lose yourself into just the flow of the story.
Yeah, and you will do that anyway. It reads fast, so it'll just happen organically.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna go and witness some stuff tomorrow. I can tell you that.
Witness, it's gonna be dope. Well, cool, man.
All right.
This was a lot of fun. I appreciate you having me on. I'll look forward to the next one.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun.
Okay, cool. Yeah. All right. Make sure you smash like for Raph and subscribe. Don't worry about my channel, but join the Discord. He's got the Discworld read along going in there too, and everybody's loving that, it seems like. So that's dope.
We're gonna have some really cool extra videos for the Discworld read along thing soon as well.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I'm gonna pick up at some point. I have so much on my TBR, but I'm gonna try and jump in at some point because I have a handful of the books. So when you get to my books, I'm gonna read them with you guys.
Very cool. All right. Yeah, great, man.
All right.
Thanks again.